So we're going to start today with Dr. Tim Chow, who is an author and a lecturer at Stanford. We're then going to turn it over to Dr. Jesse, who is the chair-elect of the AMA, Board of Trustees. We're then going to turn it back over to Tom, who you met a little earlier, high school student and my boss one day, as Dr. Chang pointed out, which is very true, definitely going to happen. And then we're going to talk to Stephen Small, who's a professor and chair of neurology at the UC Irvine. For us, what we're focused on is really actually operationally deploying artificial intelligence to have an impact today, to take on a lot of the work that people are unfortunately burdened with inside healthcare. We're laser focused in healthcare because we believe that's where a lot of inefficient use of human time or human capacity exists. And we think that we can shift a lot of that work. We can shift a lot of the work that humans are doing towards things that have a lot more value. So I'm excited about the panel. I'm excited about learning more. And then hopefully we'll have time at the end for questions. And remember, this is the last panel, so I hope you saved all your best questions and hardest questions for this panel. But turn it over to Tim Chow. Dr. Chow, if you'd like to go ahead and kick it off.
Good. Oh, all right. There's my single slide. So you're probably wondering what this has to do with anything. So I have taught at Stanford for like over 35 years, and it's actually the reason why I met Dr. Chang, Anthony. And I've been invited for, I think this is the third year. And I think it was last year I commented that this event is a situation where Anthony is the Christmas tree and we are all the ornaments. Of course, when I said that, he pointed out that he didn't want to be a dead thing, right? So I intentionally brought a live Christmas tree so that he would know that he's a live Christmas tree. So I've always appreciated Anthony inviting me. I am not from the healthcare world. I have spent most of my career in enterprise software. I started the cloud computing business at Oracle many years ago, started a class on cloud computing at Stanford. And so most of my experience is in enterprise software. So I wanted to just talk about two things today, a little bit about the past and a little bit about the future. So when you come to these things, you always learn something, or I like to learn something. And so yesterday, I don't know who the doctor was, but he got up there and he talked about an implementation they were doing in Seattle of an EMR system. And he said, yeah, reluctantly, they were going to spend $80 million doing this. And I'm sitting there in the back listening, kind of going, he couldn't have said 80 million, right? That's like nuts. And so I went online, look, and I went, my God, right? And I guess this is not news to you guys, but there are 100 million and billion-dollar implementations of EMR systems. I'm going, this is crazy. I've spent a lot of time in enterprise software. Years ago, when we implemented ERP or CRM systems, people thought that like 10, 20, $30 million implementations were like pretty over the top. No longer true. Nobody spends that kind of money. So I was just staggered to see this. And I just want to point out a couple things because I want you guys to kind of start thinking about just saying no to EMR. Number one, this stuff was built on 80s technology. I mean, this is like saying I want to go build an autonomous electric car and I've got a bunch of Model T parts to use. Number two, these things were really built to feed billing systems, right? And if you think about it, a billing system is a standardized thing. I want every bill to come out in an identical way. But we all sit around and talk about personalized healthcare. How could a system that was built for standardization ever achieve personalization? And then last, I'm looking at it going, what is it really storing, right? I mean, a bunch of handwritten notes by doctors who get to spend their time typing versus doing something useful. We all know today there are exabytes worth of data out there, and how could all of that stuff on a global basis be stored in an EMR system no matter how many hundreds of millions of dollars I spend? So I would encourage you as leaders to start thinking about why do we spend this kind of money And where should we spend money? So I'll talk a little bit about how I think about the future. So because of Anthony, I've learned a lot about hospitals, and I've been particularly focused on healthcare machines, meaning ultrasound, CT scanners, MRI, drug infusion pumps, et cetera. And I came to a realization, which I was stunned by, which is that while a hospital can have like 1,000 of these machines in the hospital, like less than 2% of them are connected. They're sitting in little isolated worlds. And these isolated worlds, which are supported by our friends at Siemens or GE or whatever, look remarkably like what it was like in computing in the 1990s. For those of you who have any experience in that, you will know there were these NetWare boxes and AS400 machines and Unix machines and Windows, and none of these things talked to each other. And then something quite remarkable happened in about, the mid-90s, and it was called the internet, right? And once the internet occurred, right, we could start connecting these machines. And I went back and looked, and it's interesting. In about 1994, when there were about 1 million machines connected, that's when the internet took off. That's Netscape, eBay, the early versions, right, of the internet took off at 1 million machines. Now, I want you to think about something. There are about 500 children's hospitals in the world today. They have, on average, 1,000 machines. What happens if we could actually connect all of those machines? We bid 500,000, which is like in striking distance of my so-called million machine number. And what could we do with that, right? Well, first, and I owe Anthony this experience, maybe we could move away from using CD-ROMs and the US mail to send images around, right? I mean, I was stunned to see that. We're watching Netflix on our phones, et cetera. And then second of all, there's so much discussion here about AI. We all know, we've seen the charts, the Jeff Dean chart, where there's an argument that the more data we throw at something, we can get nearly linear improvement in accuracy, right? The more data, the more data, the more data. There is way more data sitting in MRIs, CT scanners, drug infusion pumps, cytometer, et cetera, than there's ever going to sit inside an EMR. And so I would encourage you guys, I'm actually working, if you're at all interested, on a project to attempt to connect 500,000 machines across the world. Because I think as much as the internet has changed, as we saw earlier, Netflix, Amazon, et cetera, because we got connected, I believe the potential to connect not only the machines, but also beginning to connect the people, right, sits at the beginning of what really could be transformative for the healthcare industry. So thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Chow. Very interesting conversation. At all of, let me pull this thing. At all of, we have this chant that we do at every Friday after our all-staff meetings. So we're based in Columbus, Ohio, which is where Ohio State is. It's a football team that people like in Columbus. So we have a chant at Olive where we say I-O, and then the company says H, and it's the Internet of Healthcare. So we believe that we could build this Internet of Healthcare, and we think that's super important. So that was a great conversation. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Jesse, and I'm going to try to fix my little ear lavalier here. So go ahead.
Well, thanks. It's such a pleasure to be here. I have enjoyed so many of the conversations I've had with folks over the last day or so since I arrived. And thank you to the whole AI Med team for having me. I'm an anesthesiologist, so I spend a lot of my time hanging out in the operating room taking care of patients. My background's in clinical informatics, do a lot of predictive analytics, decision support, AI development work in my team at Vanderbilt. But my other role, and really why I'm here today, is because I have the pleasure of serving as the chair-elect of the Board of Trustees of the American Medical Association. And I wanted to chat a little bit about kind of the AMA's take on AI in healthcare. This past June, the AMA got together and put out a new policy on AI in healthcare. And since we've done that, we've been engaging with policymakers, lawmakers, innovators, people like yourselves to think about how we can push that new framework out for approaching AI in healthcare in a productive way. At the AMA, we really think that AI should be augmented intelligence, and that's kind of how we frame things. And I thought it would be worthwhile to give you a little context about how the AMA develops policy. We bring together every national medical specialty organization, every state association. They all send representatives to the AMA twice a year for a policy-making session to bring out what we think is the best policy for our nation. And this summer, a foundational policy on healthcare AI was adopted by all of those representatives representing physicians across the country. And in that process, physicians came together and told us at the AMA what we think future aspects of AI in medicine really ought to look like. Now, not surprisingly, America's physicians have repeatedly said that AI in medicine should advance the quadruple aim. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard about the triple aim, right? So population health, we want to improve that. We want to improve the patient experience. We want to improve value. And I think Dr. Small is going to talk a little about value today. But there's a quadruple aim, which is the fourth part. And the fourth part's really, really important. That is the experience of the healthcare team. And so often we're now hearing about physician and provider burnout in the healthcare space, and we really, really think that AI can help with that problem. And that's an important driver of a piece of our policy. Now, most of the headlines that you see in kind of the consumer space about AI in healthcare are focusing on clinical applications of AI systems. And those are important, but future aspects of AI in medicine really have to attack the dysfunction in healthcare that all of our healthcare team members are up against today, the burden that we as healthcare workers face, but also the burden that our patients and their families are experiencing when they're trying to interact with the healthcare system. And so the AMA, we're really urging that there be equal attention to the operational applications of AI systems in healthcare that can rid both patients and providers of the administrative, paperwork, and other cognitive burdens that continue, unfortunately, to grow day in and day out. Emphasizing both clinical and operational applications is an example of why we really think that the AMA is uniquely positioned to help ensure that the evolution of AI in medicine can benefit all of us, patients, the healthcare community, and physicians. And to do that, we think it's really, really important that innovators, people sitting here in this room, as well as policymakers, integrate the perspective of practicing physicians into the development, design, validation of healthcare AI and tools that are brought into the marketplace. Now, it should go without saying that AI systems should adhere to the best practices in user-centered design. The integration of electronic health records, however, has imposed significant cognitive burdens on physicians and other clinicians. That's why you get those $80 million price tags. A hospital where I used to work spent $1 billion implementing a new EHR system. We need to learn from those experiences so that we can focus on clinician workflow, optimizing it, simplifying our interfaces so that, again, patients and the healthcare teams and our workflows and experiences can benefit from new AI applications, whether they're clinical or operational. Now, it's pretty clear to us that there's a lot of concern about the requirements for trust and transparency in AI systems, and I'm sure that all of you, particularly those in the development community, have perspectives on what that needs to look like. We think that AI systems should be transparent and should conform to leading standards for reproducibility. And those transparency needs will vary. We recognize that depending on the extent that clinical validation has been provided and whether we're talking about informing clinical decision-making or autonomous AI systems. And there's significant research and policy work underway in order to provide clear parameters about what kind of transparency is really required depending on the different type of AI systems we're talking about. The bottom line, right, is that physicians and patients have to be able to trust their AI systems that are used in clinical care, or we're not going to use them. We also need to take steps to identify and address bias. And we want to make sure that we don't accidentally introduce or exacerbate healthcare disparities when deploying new AI tools on vulnerable populations. And a key element of the future of AI, in my perspective, is that we safeguard our patients' and others' privacy interests, preserving security and integrity of personal information. Finally, education has to play a key role for our patients and our clinicians and policymakers. And the AMA is committed to preparing physicians for appropriate use of AI tools in the future. And we do a lot of work in both graduate and undergraduate medical education to try to understand how we can do that more effectively as these tools are developing, and also trying to work to educate policymakers across the country so that they have a better understanding of what these tools mean. I really enjoyed the opportunity to be here and look forward to some conversation with the panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Jesse. Great talk. You know, one of the things that we need to always remember is of $3 trillion in cost, $1 trillion of that is administrative, right? So $1 trillion of dollars of cost goes into these burdensome processes that physicians have to go through and a lot of healthcare workers. So if we can attack that, we can really have a tidal wave of AI into the industry that will then work upstream. So next, we're going to turn it over to Dr. Small, who's going to give a presentation, and Dr. Small, take it away.
Thanks. Am I on? Yep. So thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Anthony, and it's great meeting the members of the panel and the other people I've met over the coffee break. My background is in artificial intelligence originally. I got my PhD in AI at the University of Maryland, and I joke that that was when it was a theoretical topic of no possible practical value whatsoever. And, but I subsequently went to medical school, became a neurologist, and was recruited, built a brain imaging center at the University of Chicago, and then was recruited here to UCI to head the neurology department. And when I signed on to give this lecture, I was in fact head of the neurology department. But a very creative and visionary vice chancellor for health asked me if I would move from that job to stimulate medical innovation at the University of California, Irvine. So I'm in fact now the director of medical innovation for the School of Medicine. I've given lectures to groups interested in the future of health and digital health before, and I focused on the triangle, the famous triangle of value, quality, and access, and talked about the role of how medical education would change and how it should change when students nowadays, we memorize all these facts, we memorize equations, we memorize facts. Computers do that a lot better than we do, so I actually second Jesse's view that we need augmented intelligence. That is to say, we need computers and human beings working together to solve problems. And humans sometimes, in some areas, make fewer errors than machines. Sometimes machines make fewer errors than humans, but the nature of those errors is a completely different kind of thing. Completely different. Computers don't get the big picture. One of the founders of AI in medicine, a guy named Ted Shortliff, used to go around the country. He had a computer program that could diagnose and treat infections. And he remarked all the time, my program is called Mycin. My program does not know that the heart is in the chest. And to this day, AI software and human beings make different kinds of errors and have different kinds of knowledge. I could talk about that during the question and answering period, but I thought for once I would actually give a little technical talk. So I am going to give a technical talk today in 3 minutes, and I have one slide that's actually about 4 slides. And the slide is up there on the screen, and it's about the virtual brain. And the virtual brain is a tool for precision medicine. It's not genomics, it's not proteomics, it's not metabolomics, epigenomics, it's not all those things that are going to be very important in personalized medicine. On your app, when you have your personal navigator, when you have your medical record with blockchain, and it's going to go everywhere, you need all that stuff. But you also need connectomics. I don't know if you know this, but your individual connections in your brain, the connections across your brain, are like a fingerprint. They're idiosyncratic to you. So we're building, this is an international collaboration run by Randy McIntosh at Toronto and Anna Solodkin at Irvine, who gave me these slides. And I'm going to give you an example of how we can use connectomics in precision medicine and neurology, which is my field. So suppose you take one of these individual connectomes, which is on the left. link it up with a bunch of local field models and so forth and get a connection pattern. And that you have a connection pattern, but at each node, you have local fields and you have local electrical activity that goes on. And then you propagate all of those local electrical activity across your own individual connectome. Okay? So then you have an individualized resting fMRI, or you have an individualized EEG, or whatever you want. We can use various algorithms to get different kinds of output. So suppose you can do that. Okay? Next slide, please. Thank you. So then we create, what we can do is we create a simulation of your individual brain. It's your own brain simulation. So I have now a simulation of, Anthony Chang comes into my office with a TBI, and he comes in and he was playing soccer and someone hits him on the head, and Anthony comes in. I do an MRI on him, and what I can do is I can take that MRI scan, I can simulate it. Now, why would I want to simulate the individualized MRI and the individualized functional MRI? Next slide, please. Because what I can do is I can then relate local properties in the brain to large-scale properties of the brain. What does that mean? I can then talk about what kinds of interventions might I be able to do at the local level that would affect the global level. And here you have a whole bunch of levels in time, a whole bunch of levels in space, and if I'm going to repair someone's brain, I need to understand how my changes at the local level are going to affect changes at the global level. And the last slide. So here's the pathway. Somebody comes in to the emergency room, or someone develops a problem. They come into the emergency department. The neurologist evaluates them. We do the MRI scan. We build a simulation, like I just told you. We fine-tune the simulation by comparing the actual image with the simulation. And then what we do is we explore therapies in the simulation. So we try dozens of different kinds of therapeutic manipulations in the simulation. And then we treat the patient. So this is a futuristic precision neurology. I won't go into any more because I've used up my 4.5 or 7 minutes and my one slide, which was 3, and I'll leave it for the discussion section. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Small. So I learned a new word, connectomics. Definitely going to take that and start talking about it as though I know what it is. I appreciate that. All right, so last on the panel for a presentation before we open it up to questions is Tom. So you've got to meet Tom a little earlier, super impressive high school student who has created an organization within his student body. So Tom, go ahead and tell us a little bit more about what you've done.
Hi, good morning everyone. Again, my name is Tom Merkin. I'm currently a junior at DayIII High School, and today I'm going to be talking about some of the future aspects of AI in medicine. So to briefly recap what I said earlier this morning, my first exposure to AI was actually this past summer during the MI3 summer internship at Children's Hospital of Orange County, which is actually one of the programs that Dr. Chang heads. And from a young age, I've always had my mind set on becoming a doctor. It was one of my many passions. And up until this past summer, I didn't really hold much interest in learning any coding, engineering, or any other AI-related aspects of medicine. And it was only following this internship, after listening to multiple doctors, engineers, nurses, medical researchers, businessmen, that I found one common theme. AI is the future of medicine, whether I liked it or not. But it was okay, because the experiences that I had in the internship motivated me to take an active interest in the impacts AI are going to have on healthcare in the future, which is why I sit here before you today. And those experiences, that knowledge, and all of the things that I learned throughout those 3 months of the internship really changed my entire thoughts on medicine moving forward, really helped me reevaluate my own goals, helped me start my journey in coding in Python, R, and TensorFlow, and kind of helped me prepare to become a different kind of doctor than the ones we have right now. No offense to the ones in the room. I love you guys. You guys are great. But all this new info that I had absorbed, I knew that it was not only going to be useful for my peers in my high school who are also looking for futures in medicine and beyond. It was, in fact, crucial for them to know this. So I took the initiative to start AI Med Club at my high school, with the main purpose just to be to introduce basic AI concepts to my peers and sort of broaden their understanding of the impacts AI will have on their futures in healthcare and medicine. And starting in January, I'll be bringing in guest speakers to talk about these various topics and sort of help broaden that understanding for my club members. And I'd like to take the opportunity to invite all of you to share your expertise and knowledge to my club members. It's typically a 20 to 30-minute talk any weekday around noon. And if you're interested, we can talk after the panel and have that arranged. But this leads me to the topic of the future of AI, which for me personally poses more questions than it does answers, but I'm hoping that within this session and within the broader AI Med community, we can start to form some solutions. So the formation of my AI Med Club kind of led me to think about how other institutions and organizations are preparing themselves for a future in AI, with one institution particularly in mind, medical school. How are medical schools preparing their students for a future in AI, if at all? And my hope is that we see an increase in the number of medical school administrative staff here present at AI Med. And so with the knowledge that they can gain and absorb, they can then go back to their respective schools and successfully implement AI-based courses into their curriculum. Additionally, how are different specialties implementing AI and at what rate? And how can one specialty match the AI implementation rate of another? What distinguishes cardiology from radiology in the AI in healthcare sector? And while as exciting as it is to see the leaps and bounds we've made in AI for healthcare, the realities of practicing medicine still exist, like medical malpractice and lawsuits. How will medical malpractice be interpreted in the face of AI-assisted treatment and diagnosis? If a prescription or a medical procedure goes wrong, how will medical malpractice be affected? And these are all important and pressing issues that must be discussed and solved so that we can make the transition from healthcare of the past to healthcare of the future as smooth, efficient, and effective as possible. And to sort of recap on something I said earlier as well, in 10 years, I see AI as something that's, in 10 years I see AI as something that's not as highly discussed as it is today, only because it will have become as essential and normal for a doctor to have as a stethoscope around their neck. And I believe that in 10 years, with most of our currently pressing issues in AI in healthcare solved, we'll be looking to take our current tools and skills and apply them on a more global scale, solving bigger issues like global epidemics and outbreaks, and really elevating what is now AI in healthcare to global wellness care. And that's all. Thank you.
Wow. My junior year of high school was very different than yours. I can tell you that. That's so impressive. It gives you a lot of hope for the future, doesn't it? To hear folks like Tom talk. That's amazing. Congrats to you. So before we open it up to the audience, I have just a question to say is, before we focus on making the robots much like a human, we need to focus on making the human a lot less like a robot. And I think there's a time when that shifts. If you had to predict 2019, going into 2019, what is the thing that you see happening with removing the robot out of the human and freeing up the humans to do what are uniquely suited for humans? What's going to happen when we sit here a year from now that we're going to experience over the course of the next year? Any thoughts? Any ideas? What cool thing could happen in 1 year?
Can I make a counter comment? Oh, is this on?
Sure, you can say whatever you want.
All right. I mean, I have lived in the middle of software and the revolution for now 30 years plus. And I'll make a comment that so far, the transformation has really only occurred in a couple of industries: financial services, retail, and a little bit of entertainment, right? Largely because these industries are not really in the physical world, right? As soon as you start touching the physical world, and I'm spending time in power, construction, agriculture, healthcare, the speed of transformation has not been high, and it's been very difficult. And I share everybody's optimism that this thing can change, but on the flip side, I made the comment, we all like to talk about all this stuff, and yet all these machines are sitting in isolation. Everybody's dealing with things in little silos. There is no network. I mean, we like to talk about the Internet of Things, but there is no Internet. And so, I sometimes think that, we need to do some crawling first.
Yeah.
And then we can do some walking. And, a lot of these cool things that we like to talk about, there's a lot of blocking and tackling that's going to have to happen before all the cool stuff happens.
Yeah.
And it's going to take longer than we all would like,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
Don't disagree, Dr. Small?
Yeah, I think some of that blocking and tackling actually has to do with the incentive system that we have. Our incentives are completely misaligned. And Upton Sinclair I'll paraphrase because I don't remember the exact quote, said, you can't easily get somebody to start doing something if it's going to make it untenable to have a salary. Right? And so, we right now, we have use-based financing of healthcare. So the more procedures I do, the more patients I see, I get paid more. I get paid more whether I do good stuff, bad stuff, unnecessary stuff, necessary stuff. So we need to change the entire incentive system. Once we have the incentives better to take care of health, to take care of populations and so forth, we reverse those or readjust those incentives, we'll do better. There was an article in either the Times or the Journal about 6 months ago. Many of you probably know this about the Hopkins and Maryland emergency departments and asthma. And they were taking care of a lot of children who had asthmatic attacks. You may see this in CHOC as well, I don't know. Take care of a lot of children with asthmatic attacks. And somebody realized that all of those children were from the same zip code. And if you go to that zip code and actually try to find the sources of the problem, you could help the health of the people in Baltimore enormously. But the incentives were just misaligned to do that. I'll leave it to my colleague from Stanford and so forth to figure out exactly how AI can be used to alter those incentives. But, the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference is coming up in January. People are acutely interested in how to change these incentives. And I'm sure the AMA is too.
We are, I would say on the short horizon, there are some fundamental policy and infrastructure things that need to happen to enable what we all want to see. I wish I would say that consumer demand is going to drive all of this. I don't think it will. I don't see patients demanding their data as a movement. That'd be great if that happened, but I don't see that. But today we really struggle around issues related to interoperability in common data models in ways that really hinder the ability of data to flow across systems and to be able to be used in ways that I think will be really, really powerful by these AI tools. And it's hard when patients go from system to system, entity to entity today because you just lose what happens to the patient. And there are certainly a lot of companies out there working on those kinds of things. And I expect that we'll see at the regulatory policy side some, in the short term, adjustments to try to help make those things more tenable.
Tom, any thoughts? Future 2019? Blow our minds.
It's next week, guys.
So while I may not have the grand knowledge my three colleagues may have in regards to all of these big pressing issues, I see the upcoming year for me, beyond my work with the AI Med Club, I see the next upcoming year as more of a year to sort of focus on those, possibly just those initial advancements in those problems that we may have. Like he said, it may not be possible for us to make huge leaps and bounds in the amount of time we may think, but I believe it's still important to sort of focus on putting in that effort to focus on making those innovations happen as much as possible. Take, for example, my AI Med Club in and of itself. it took a while for it to even pass in the first place. I initially proposed it back at the beginning of the year, August of this year, and it got failed at first. And the only one comment was, do you even know what you're doing? You're a junior in high school, and you're here proposing a club talking about these big concepts. And within a couple of months' time, I was able to go back to them and propose the solution of, I've been a part of the MI3 internship, so I have background knowledge, and beyond that, I am making connections with various professionals who I can have come guest speak if you are at all doubtful of my ability. I have teachers supporting me for this club. And so this achievement for me was sort of a milestone in what can help launch the future of AI Med. And I believe that's what represents the spirit of optimism in what can help shape the future. And I believe that's what should be focused on, not just within the next year, but within the years to come.
Yeah, that's great.
What are some things that we have to do to shift culture? Like you mentioned having that optimism at an individual level, but what are some things that we have to do at a collective level to kind of progress this future? And that is kind of broad, but I wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
I live in a specialty, anesthesiology, that attracts, I think, just by the nature of what we do, people that like to innovate, that are technically inclined. And so I think that I think amongst physicians in general, but particularly where I kind of live and hang out in the operating room, I think that innovative spirit is there, but it gets crushed. It gets crushed by the burden, by the burnout, by all of the hoops that we have to jump through just to do the things we have to do to type on the computer to get it done. I think we need to sort of take steps to sort of alleviate those burdens, to sort of free people in the industry up to allow us to embrace kind of that optimistic spirit so that we can get solutions that actually work.
Yeah, it's going to be an interaction between what happens in the private sector, Walgreens, CVS, all of these, the commodity. It's going to be Amazon. The kinds of demands that people like Tom, his generation want. They demand apps. They demand on-demand data. They demand interactivity, connectivity. So there'll be an interaction of that, and we need education. We need to educate our medical students differently. We also need to educate our patients differently. So in grade schools and high schools, we need to start introducing the fact that the patient is responsible for his health and should demand certain kinds of things with respect to their health. They should know, their app should ding, ding, ding when they walk into a restaurant and order too many potato chips. If it knows that they have a certain gene and it knows they have a certain cholesterol and it knows their blood pressure is a certain level, or they already had a certain amount of salt intake, a median mean salt intake over the last weekday, month, year. I mean, these are the kinds of things that come together. So I think it's the education, but I also think it's the private sector is going to innovate in a way. A lot of what we do is going to become commodity, and that's going to push things in a certain direction. That's my view.
I'll just echo that for a second and just say, because I've been doing a lot of thinking about how we educate. I teach class in computer science, right? So you start looking at and you realize what we're doing today. When I had the opportunity to have a bunch of mechanical engineers in my class a couple of years ago, but this is Stanford University, right? So I asked them, because, were you guys taking any software classes? Is there any software in your curriculum? And the answer was zero. And in fact, if they wanted to take, quote, software classes, they were told, and if you know Stanford, you take CS 106 A and B. And I happen to know what's in that. And I'm like, this is ridiculous, right? We've created an education system on the computer science side, which I like to say is like training hydraulic engineers. Yes, I need some hydraulic engineers to design the next P-trap, but I need way more plumbers than I need hydraulic engineers. And our curriculum across the board has nothing to do with plumbing. And in fact, when you talk to CS kids that leave Stanford, yes, great, they get really enormous salaries. They'll tell you that basically everything they learn in school is useless. And I think this is a huge gap in our system. I am not personally a believer that this is going to happen because MIT, Stanford, whatever, change curriculums. I think there has to be an emergent new mechanism so that we can teach people how to use this technology, which is, as we've talked many times here, transformative.
How many doctors in the audience actually make use of their knowledge about the Krebs cycle in their day-to-day practice?
On that point,
Well made.
the AMA has recognized this, and we announced in November that we're putting $15 million into an initiative to reimagine residency education, and a big piece of that is recognizing that what we're teaching is missing the mark in many cases to allow our future practitioners to have the tools that they need, and a big piece of that obviously touches on the AI space.
When I taught computer science at the University of Rochester many years ago, this is to respond to what Tim had said. We had a bunch of industry there at the time, which unfortunately is not there anymore. Kodak, you know what happened to them, Xerox, Bausch & Lomb. And they would tell us, we taught the same kinds of things that CS 106 A and B, is that what you call them, teach at Stanford. And we were told by those industries, we don't take anybody from University of Rochester. We only take people from the Rochester Institute of Technology because they actually teach what we need people to do when we hire them. So that's exactly the same story. That's 25 years, 30 years ago.
Sorry, the next question after the... So after talking about education and culture, especially for the hospitals and the doctors to come to the new century of the AI, the next thing that what I want to get your opinion is about the interoperability. You talk about interoperability, and for interoperability there are many items that need to happen. What are those items? Let's say connectivity, all the doctors share the data. Maybe we can remove this privacy thing that we think is too big. Privacy is big only in US, I think, mainly. Why not clean the data, name of the patient, and just share the data? All those things needed to happen for AI to bloom. So.
Yeah, big problems on the interoperability space. The AMA has put a lot of thought and effort into trying to help advance that issue. But I'll tell you, we have 72 different ways that we record and measure blood pressures in our hospital. And they're all represented differently in our electronic medical record. That's just Vanderbilt. So you think about when I want to share blood pressure with Steve at Irvine, God help you. So there are real problems that actually I think AI can really be very well poised to help us with in the interoperability space. But there are structural issues, and as you alluded to, there's certainly issues around privacy rights, data access issues that right now there's not a great framework to allow interoperability to be where it needs to be.
There is something very important that I didn't even realize until some months ago, which is HIPAA. I always learned about HIPAA as very important to protect patients' privacy, and we have to do a lot of things to protect patients' privacy because that's what HIPAA is. Well, I don't know if you know, the first Chief Technology Officer of the United States, a guy named Anish Chopra, he was one of the people who helped work on healthcare policy in previous administrations. And he pointed out in a lecture that I heard up at SAP in Palo Alto that the second P in HIPAA is portability. And so a patient has the right to have their own data. They have the right to push but he's trying to advocate a blue button program where a patient can push a button and send the data to him and his people to manage. But the point is, suppose each person had their own data and owned their own data. They have the right to give that data to anybody they want. So it may be the solution to some of these privacy issues is to allow the patients to control their record. The record, why does the hospital control the record? For compliance and billing purposes. Why don't you let the patient have the record and then you develop the interoperability over their portability rights rather than over the privacy issue?
This is a super important topic for me and one that actually got me into healthcare. So my background is I was an intelligence officer. I worked at NSA before coming into healthcare, and we didn't share anything August of 2001. You know, CIA, NSA, FBI, DEA, NGA, NRO, you name it, of the 11, 12 intelligence community members didn't share anything until September 2001. And suddenly everybody shares everything. And you talk about like data being not standardized. This is non-cooperative data, hundreds of thousands of rows every second, coming from billions of sources across the globe. We figured it out.